is WX Live webinars, and this morning, which is February 28th, 2014, we're having webinar number 106, and Jeff Graham has prepared a demonstration of how he uses .NET assemblies. So enjoy. Jeff, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to do this in three pieces. First is the project that generates a WinDev .NET assembly. Then we'll go into Visual Studio, and as a disclaimer, I am not a Visual Studio programmer. I had to use it because we wanted to interface to biometric hardware, finger scanners and palm scanners. Recent project was palm scanners. So I needed to use their C# examples to interface with our school lunch point of service application. So the first step is that we're going to generate a .NET assembly from WinDev that allows us to use Hyperfile to access the server. And on the screen is the .NET generating application, just a sample. But this is one of them that I was using as an early test. There's actually two here. And the reason for that is there's still one little problem occasionally, and that is that it will cause an access violation. This has been reported to PCSoft. But this class, and what you do is you create a class in WinDev, and then when you generate, that class becomes a .NET assembly. And in here, I actually have connection to, we see it over here. The constructors are basically the same, but during the constructor, it actually connects to Hyperfile client server based on an INI file. And you notice here it says that if it doesn't find the INI file, it gives it information. That's confirmation that I use it right in this demonstration. I don't have the INI file there, so that this message comes out and tells us that it is executing the constructor again, because it's interesting, it'll do it multiple times. Then, but the defaults in here are all the same as in the INI file. Then there's, looking at this class, we just have some default values. This is one that we'll be using here. A default string. We'll be able to set that string, read it again from C#, and then we will also be able to get the version. I had to put this version processing in because when you're changing a .NET assembly, either from WinDev or with Visual Studio, getting it into reinitialized within WinDev sometimes is difficult. And this has also been reported to PCSoft, and they've are supposedly going to make that easier. And in this, we'll also have a demonstration of .NET processing. I mean, of .NET delegate, which is how you can pass events, which is what we wanted to do. Is when we identify a student, we want to send an event to the point of service program that tells who the student is. So this said, this is, as you see, is a .NET configuration to create an assembly. And then the way you do that is you just do the generate and step through the process. And then this is the version. It automatically increments the generation number, of course. And these are actually test windows that are used to test the classes when I'm developing them. They can be in this, but only these two templates will be part of the .NET assembly. And I'm generating it for Network 4 because, Framework 4, because that's required for our SDK interface. So, and you let it, we won't go all the way through to the generation part because I have Visual Studio open and it'll probably say, well, it may not because I'm not running anything. Yeah, you get the arrow saying it's in use. So, but it's already there. Now, if we go to the next step with Visual Studio, you'll see that this full screen. In here are the references. This is the .NET assembly that we created with WinDev. And this is the one that we're creating. The one we created with WinDev is WinDev Gen down here. Now, interesting thing to point out is this WL is the WinDev language class that it includes in here. Here are our two classes that we created in WinDev, and you see the methods and properties that were made visible, whether they're public or not. We had two properties that were public. And here's the other one, which is simpler. There.
So
So
that's
those were,
pretty good. You can see all the methods and properties, and you don't even have to go prototype it. It just sees it, huh?
yes, that's right. And
Perfect.
based on the way you do it in, let's go back for a second to the WinDev project, and we'll look at that again. You can see here that we had two public properties, and that is just indicates whether it's connected or not, and the number of records. This is important to our application because it tells us how many students are enrolled or have templates out there. In this test case, it doesn't really matter much. And then the version is private, but it's accessed from a method called getVersion, surprisingly. And if you look at it, it just returns that property. And that version is set in the constructor by using, it's set right here at this point. And it just gives the execution info structure. Basically, most any WinDev command can be put in these classes, and then they're accessible in in C# or Visual Basic, whatever, in Visual Studio language, or anything that can access the .NET assembly. There are some limitations, and that is that the internal format of many data items in WinDev are not directly accessible. So by using the .NET assembly, you can access it from Visual Studio easier than passing variables around sometimes. So going back to Visual Studio here, this is a class project here that where we're creating a Visual Studio class called CS WD Demo. Now this part here, from this point to here, is what interfaces with .NET Delegate. And this part here, from here to here, is where C# can then call to create a .NET Delegate event. This first one, is just a simple one that just says an event occurred. And but this one, which is the more interesting one and what we need, passes result arguments. And the arguments can be anything that you want to pass in the event. In our case, we want to send a code back that indicates whether it was successful, where it was not, or what happened. And we want to send an ID that is the student ID. So that's why we have two codes here. There could be many more, but this is basically defines the format, the types, and the number of elements that you're going to pass back in an event when an event occurs that you can get in receive in WinDev. Now that I have a little test program in another the test project, and the class requires two references to run WinDev. The this is our WinDev generated .NET assembly, but for it to run, it will also require a DLL, which is a .NET assembly that contains all the processing within that WinDev needs. So that is your WL definition. In your, let's go back to the class again. In the class, this using WL up here is required for you to be able to see the WinDev assembly. Now, and these are all public methods that we're defining that we will use in the WinDev project in the next step. This one allows us to pass a string to Visual Studio and it can do something with it. And then in this case, it's just as simple. It comes back and shows what string you passed to it. This one, now you notice here's where we're actually declaring the WinDev.NET assembly. If you remember the name CLHF access, that was generated by WinDev. That contains the methods, and go to the object browser. This is the CLF access and all the methods that we defined in the WinDev project. So I'll go to the right one here. And then we defined these are just little test things I defined just to show the thing. Now this is an event where we can call this method that says generate an event, a .NET delegate event, a simple one that has no arguments. It's just an event. This one is the one that passes a code and a string. Now, since there's parameters on this method, in WinDev, we can call this method. This would be one application talking to another one, for example. And we can say, this is the code, this is the string, pass that to in a .NET or delegate event, and we'll demonstrate that in the next part of this demonstration. Let's see if there's anything else I need to point out here. Any questions about this? I guess not. So now we have a test program which you use to test our Visual Studio class, which also is testing the WinDev generated applications. So this one also requires the using WL because we're using WinDev generated classes in this little test code. But it also requires the class that we created with that we were just looking at, created in C#, the C# WD Net class. So now here's where we create the HF access object from the WinDev class. And when you do this, this is the point where it'll come up and do the constructor, which makes the connection to Hyperfile client server to access the data. And then we're going to show the DLL path and the version, and then we'll test the passing of the reading of a string, the changing of a string, and then right here I am demonstrating that you can write data to, at this point, write data to a hyperfile by a template access. Now this one is going to get an error because, and I want to demonstrate how it captures, you can capture exceptions within WinDev. So let's just run this test. And it's a simple little console test. Now this, oh, it's on the other screen. Let me bring it over. We got this message pop up. You remember in the class, in the connection constructor, it said that if they could not find the INI file, give a message. And this is where it's looking for the INI file. But its defaults allows it to go ahead and connect. So step one, this bit of code here, put this message out saying where, and it went back to the WinDev.NET assembly to get the file path for the DLL. And then it shows the version. So you know that you're looking at the correct generation of the WinDev if you need to know that, or the WinDev.NET assembly. And the value is connected, so we are connected to the hyperfile database. Then it read the string, the test string, and its initial value when we declared it in WinDev was default value. Now we can put in a new string of any kind. We're reading that, and I got a message on the other screen that, and this is what I was going to point out. But now it changed that string, and it displayed that right here. Now we're down at this point right here, and we've got a message coming from WinDev. Let's go back and look at that because it's interesting. In the write data code, this is where all of this was built because I'm trying to write binary fields to hyperfile, which is not an easy thing. So this was just a test, and so it built a file. It did an hadd here. Now I enabled the exception processing in WinDev, and it's a good thing because now it kept, and here's what the message we're looking at. The exception is the write data, and if I did not have this here, they would pass this exception to Visual Studio, and it comes up with an exception that tells you nothing about what the problem is. So now if we go back to Visual Studio again, or back to that message, find it here. Okay, this is the message we're getting up now. We look at the details. It says that cardinalities related to the foreign key are not respected. So it caught the fact that we were writing a buffer and we did not have a valid accounts ID in that record. So that's great. That's a lot easier to figure out with the WinDev information than the weird messages I was getting from Visual Studio. So I left that error in there just to show this process. And now if we cancel it, it'll go ahead and continue running. And it says the write data failed, which is this comment right here. Okay, now let's continue on here. Get that back up on the screen. All right, now let's make this side by side, make it much easier. Okay, and all we need to do to continue on is to hit the enter key. Now, this is the connection again. So we are going into this part of the code here where we have created, we're testing .NET Delegate, and it has to open that, we're calling a Visual Studio method, which is accessing a method that is needed by WinDev. So it opens this again. And we go back to this screen. Stop. This is where it created the new, it instantiated the Visual Studio process. And we should have gotten another message here. And I'm not sure why it's not coming up here. Okay, let's stop this. I've got the exception on the other screen. I canceled it. Write data failed. This is what it was hung on. Because we were instantiating. Oh, sorry, I keep losing it. When we instantiate this right here, we're instantiating the CSharp.NET assembly, which then instantiates a the WinDev.NET assembly. It has to open that file again, and we get that message, which we have to reply to continue on. And that's why it was hanging up. All right, so now it's ready to fire an event. Now this is C# firing an event, but it's receiving its own event. That's something else. Oh, there's another, they're on the other screen. It's saying, this is a message from the event handler saying that a simple event occurred in my test program. And now it fired a result event. And we passed it right here. We passed it 25 and 54321. And it received 25 and 54321. So now we're coming down to the other class that we saw on our WinDev program, instantiating it. Of course, not an INI file there. And I'm doing that intentionally so we know that the constructor is occurring. Now, and I have a stop here because this is one of the problems that has caused me a lot of grief and arguments with PC Soft. Is everything is fine at this point, and if you continue now, you'll get an access violation exception. This saying that other memory is corrupt. This is something within WinDev, but it does not occur with the one class and it does with the other. And I have not figured out yet what it is. So if we comment out, just to prove that point, we comment out the use of this class and run this again, and it automatically recompiles this test program. And here is on the other screen. And this is the first part repeating again. And the write data failed. Now we're going into the event processing, just like we saw previously. And now we're at the exit point again, and we continue on now, and there's no access violation. And I cannot find the cause in this one class. But now let's move on and look at WinDev using these events. Now this is another WinDev project, which is just a standard 32-bit executable. But we are using the C# generated .NET assembly, which contains the WinDev generated .NET assembly. And if we look at the classes down here, you see all the constructors, all the methods and everything we defined in Visual Studio. Also included in that is the arguments definition or model for the .NET delegate event. This part of the process is interesting. Now this is, I have a window which demonstrates the use of this processing. So if we look at the code, you've got the declaration of the C# class for the .NET Assembly. And then this is how you define the programs that process the .NET delegate events. And it's one called WD simple event and WD result event. Now these are, figuring out how to define these was difficult for me, not being a C# programmer, and the fact that I was trying to do it in 62-bit, and 62-bit did not work. I may remember some of my posts and whatever. PCSoft, to their credit, gave me a fix that allowed the 64-bit to work. 32-bit did work without a problem. Now, if we go down and look at those procedures, just for quick, the simple event, and this with a .NET delegate, if you go through the help, you have to declare them in this format. Simple event, and all this does is just put out a message in the log. This French name is there because I copied this out of the French version 17.NET. They had an example which used .NET delegate in 17, and then when they went to 18, they removed the .NET delegate because it wasn't working, probably, and did it with their own function that they added. And then in 19, they put it back in. So, and this just does a list add to the thing. And if we look at the one with arguments, and then you declare this second parameter as a result arguments, and then you can access the code and the accounts ID. Whatever you defined in WD result args in C# can now be accessed in WinDev to get the information that you want. And we just format those into the message list. This other test here, where we say use CLHF access directly, well, there's two ways of doing that. And we'll look at that code. This is that button code, and we create an object OAccess as a CLHF access. Now, interestingly, you do not have that particular, oh yes you do, right there. It's not CLA access, but this comes across because I defined in my C#. This is something I just did yesterday, actually. And let's look at this. Where I declare at this point, I declare the HF access as a public object. So that means that in WinDev, when we bring in that class, here is HF access. So we can use it directly from the C# assembly. You can't import the WinDev.NET assembly into here because it says you can't load the same assembly twice. And that assembly is part of the C# assembly, and so you can't load it individually. To show that, this is where I access it publicly. This first one is where I access it as part of the C# assembly, even though CLHF access does not show in this list. It shows that the DLL is accessible here. I presume that's what that means, but we'll see that. So let's run this test, and here it popped up that we're executing the constructor, and that's at the point where we instantiate the C#.NET assembly that contains the this is the constructor in the WinDev.NET assembly. I hope this isn't too confusing. So here's our test running. Now we are just, let's bring the code up and we can see it at the same time we're doing this. Okay, so we have declared, we're at this point right here where, sorry, I went through this, I was on the same other screen. Now, we're going to enter some kind of message. And then we run the show message in the C#.NET assembly, and it comes back and puts up a standard window message saying, message passed to CS, message from WinDev. Okay. And then this is just the info here saying that I received back 0 from that method. So this is just the read of the number of templates. That's a if you remember, I declared 2 public methods in the original .NET assembly, and this is just accessing one in the C# assembly. And this is the other one where it's the path of the DLL. And keeping straight where the DLLs and what's required is sometimes very confusing. So now here's where we're using the 2. We're down at this point here. And we get, and it returned the version for, and then we accessed it this time through C#.NET assembly, the embedded one. And now we're doing the public one. And we get the same result. Now here's where we're firing a simple event and it puts it in the log. Now we fire a result event and we put it in the log. And they're These can be done any number of times, and they're totally asynchronous, which is what we needed. So now I mentioned about keeping the DLL straight and all that. Let me just show a bit of that real quick. When you generate this is the project where we generated the DLL, and it put in the required .NET DLL. Well, there are more DLLs required than that for it to actually run. And usually what PCSoft says is just put them all in. But this is our C# project. This is where we ran it in C#. And here are all the DLLs required. This is the DLL generated by WinDev that we included in its debug process. Here is the test program. And then here are all the WinDev DLLs that are required. You'll always have to run the STD, and if you access hyperfile, you got to have the HF, and you have to have the VM, and the rest of them will be determined based on what you have in your class. And if we go back to where we're using it here, this is our runtime directory, and here's all the DLLs that are required to run that little test that we just saw. So keeping all that straight, one of the problems that I had is when you're developing a .NET assembly, either in WinDev or in combination of WinDev and C#, getting the correct one loaded into your WinDev project when you change it is difficult. You can't just say recompile or resync. It will not redo the .NET assemblies. You have to basically go in here, and if you go in here and just remove, if you went in here and just remove this, WinDev crashes. And that's been reported to PCSoft, and it's supposedly on the list to be fixed. And there's also, if you're doing multiple configurations, 32-bit and 64-bit, for example, like we do in our application, then you'd have to have two different assemblies that include the DLLs for 32-bit and for 64-bit. But there is no way to have two assemblies loaded into WinDev and say, use this one in this configuration and use the other one in the other configuration like you can with Windows reports and queries. So I made a suggestion to PCSoft that they include that ability. They said they were putting it on the list, but who knows what release that will come out in. And that's basically it. Now I want to switch screens to show you how what the end result was. Oh, how do I get back to switching screens?
Jeff, do you need help on that?
Do you see this screen now?
Yeah, I see your WX Live.
Okay, so this is our application for school lunches. Let me get this down. And that is Smith Rock State Park, Monkey Face Rock. And this is only used by schools in Oregon, and we developed it when we lived in Terrebonne, right next to this park. So we put that picture on there. But now, if they're processing meals, this little delay is when it's initializing the scanner. This button says the scanner's there. Now they don't see this because it's in the background, but I'll put it up there so that you can see it. This is running in C#, and it is a 64-bit application. And I only have one palm enrolled here. This is the list of the accounts ID. There's only one. So this is running in the background, and if you were hearing the audio from the screen, it actually speaks the words that show up right here, and it says ready. So I'll go ahead and put my palm on here, and it's already identified me. That's the palm print there, and I don't know, did you hear the don't move your hand?
No, bummer.
Okay, it was saying that. It tells you if your hand's in the wrong place or if it's not flattened and so forth. Now, I brought up the student that quick. So now if we
It
give them,
sounded like my mother. I'd have heard it.
Did you hear
okay,
it, Andy?
let's,
No, no, I'm saying if it sounded like my mother, I would have heard it.
oh,
Yeah.
Don't
all
move
right, we'll
that
do it
hand.
one more time and see if you hear it.
Okay, okay. Give us a warning, like five,
I'm
three,
getting
two,
ready
one.
to do it, so we'll all
Okay.
be quiet. Did you hear the don't move and then flatten
No,
Nah.
maybe
process?
you gotta put your mic close to the speaker or something.
Uh, anyway,
Is it a
it
pleasant
just
sound?
it just does it uses the sound text to sound um,
Oh, does it?
Is it a woman?
to do that, and it talks to them and says that it's ready or whatever. So
All
now we
right.
processed the milk, but you can see it is really give them another milk, and they would not see this normally because it's behind and it pops up when you do enrollment. But I'm getting ready to put my hand on, and it's that fast to identify a student
Just by their palm?
just by their palm.
Hmm.
It's if we go, let's see, I'll show you a picture of it on our website, and I want no comments about our website.
Yes, dear.
It's really pathetic, and it's not up very old. Except this is we just added these in here. This is what the scanner I'm putting my palm on looks like,
Hmm.
and you just stick those two little tabs between your fingers and it puts your palm in the right place like the kid is doing there. This one has a paper template on it to help them spread their hand.
Ah,
So
It does
that's
here
for
too.
little kids' hands, man. That's small.
Right. You use a little smaller hand guide for the young kids, but we've done preschoolers and it identifies them quickly.
Hmm.
You have to use a different guide and a little different settings, but with middle school and older, you use this one, and with adults, use this hand guide. And we just installed it in a school in Oregon 2 days ago, and they enrolled 170 students and used it in lunch. They enrolled them between breakfast and lunch and used it for lunch. The only problem they had was that when the line got slow, the kids put their hand on there, left it on there. As soon as she gave them a milk, it re-enabled the scanner and it read the same one again, and it was confusing them. So they had to tell them to put their hand on there and then remove it. But it would
So
just
that's
work.
why her finger's pointing at it. Get your finger off.
Yeah. So anyway, uh, I hope that was useful information. Any questions after all this? Normally it would be the picture of the student, but they added, this is the school that we, and normally the pictures would show there, but they haven't put
Well,
their pictures in these
probably
days.
with this webinar, we surely don't want the picture. Otherwise, we'd probably get
Right. That's why I
have to
left
knock
it,
it out.
use the old
Yeah.
data.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well,
Yeah.
you can
Look
show
at that.
little
You got
yard monkeys. You can show little yard monkeys instead as demos.
right. Yeah, I'll have to put up a demonstration type thing.
So is that your vessel in the
It's our
water?
sailboat that is being neglected because we've been too busy taking care of animals here. It's
Hmm.
now sitting in a pole barn over there with the mast out to be refinished, and it's been there for 2 years.
Oh no.
Hopefully, we'll get
It's
it
what you
back in
call
the water this summer.
Hey, that's just called a long-term project.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is, and particularly when you don't get any time to work on it.
Going back to your .NET delegate
Yes.
for a second there. If you can go back and show that for a second, I got sidetracked there.
Okay.
Um,
Here's the.
now
You
this
mean
is
where it's defined or where it's used?
yeah, where it's defined. It's really the definition because you remember I was in the midst of trying to do a big old chunk in .NET delegates in 18 or 18, and it really doesn't work very well.
Right. That's because. Were you doing it in 64-bit or 32?
32.
32 it will work, but it is very difficult to define it.
Yes,
And
it's the definition that was giving me fits.
yes, and they're actually, I think they do have a problem. Um, this name is very long. And if you follow typical C#
Right.
methods, that's the way it ends up. When you
Right.
start typing it into WinDev, it just keeps changing it on me.
Yeah.
And I did it probably 20 times before it finally kept this definition here. That this part right here was the hard part to get in and
That's
for
correct.
it to correct.
I
And
actually
that
ended up
is a
typing that into a
column in the
different
editor.
editor and cut and pasted it.
Right. And once you get it in, once you get those defined, it works great.
Mm.
But defining it, and it has to match up with the definition over here. You have to include the um, result arguments here, and in here you have to find the right methods for adding these are
Yeah, this is part of the problem I had with some of that, and I think it just had to deal with what I was trying to do. I was trying to do that XMPP chat message thing, and I just ran into too many problems.
right. And but it will work if you stick. And in 19, I've already loaded the down the French 19, and
Yeah,
it processes .NET delegates much cleaner,
good.
and they're simpler to put in. Of course, it helps if you can read a little French, which I can't.
Well, that ain't happening. I tried that 1 year.
Yeah, but
I gave up on that. I got to
it
get my Rosetta Stone out.
well, once you know about where things are and once you learn a few words, it actually you can do it, but it's not. You can do it for testing
Yeah,
a single type thing that you have a one in 18 and then you doing it in 19, which is what I
yeah,
did to make
yeah,
sure that it's going to do what we want, and that
yeah,
because the 64-bit ones would not work at all. They did
yeah.
nothing. And but they gave me a fix for that, and they kind of worked, but they didn't work cleanly.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping 19 allows me to use that function fully.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, thanks.
But matching those two up is the trick.
Yeah.
And it does take some playing around with it a bunch. Any other questions? I guess that's it.
I don't see any questions, so people can look at the recording again and see if they can do it. But that's
And
pretty
if
interesting how you pulled that together. So, and there's a demonstration notes there, the PDF that you can download. But I will also put it on the link on the WX Live page with your
Okay.
webinar.
And if anyone has any questions, I'm glad to answer them and give any help where I can.
Oh, that's good.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Well, thank you very much, Arnold.
Okay,
And
thank you, and
thank you, Andy.
Yay.
and we'll see if we grab you again for your next set of talks.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Jeff.
Glad to do it.
Later, Andy. Say the words.
Later. Be good or be good at it.
That's
y'all.
right. Bye.
Bye.